everyone, it's Margaret Manning here with 60andMe. This is the place where women who are aging beautifully come to be inspired. And my guest today is Ora Nadrich. Ora is the founder and president of the Institute for Transformational Thinking, and she is a mindfulness teacher and life coach. She is the author of two amazing books, the Live True, A Mindfulness Guide to Authenticity, and Says Who. Now, we've talked about Says Who in a previous interview, but I wanted to talk to you this time about another issue that a lot of women in our 60andMe community face, Ora. I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Well, I was mentioning to you that we have a community of women here who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I'm really interested in the work that you've done with addictive personalities. And through just talking to lots of women in our community, there's a theme that goes through this. In their childhood or early years, there were things established that affected their behavior today. There were not so much addictive related to drugs or substances, but behavior. I'd love you to share your findings on this and what you'd like to offer about it.
Well, I did do a series called Says Who for the Addictive Personality.
Ah, okay.
And it was with a man named Johnny Calloway, whose specialty is in the area of addiction as a recovering addict himself. Mm-hmm. And what I said on this show is that, I think we all have compulsivity, the ability or the propensity or proclivities to sometimes feel out of control with our impulses, and for some people it takes them in the area of substances, and for other people it takes them in the area of eating or sex or whatever they do in excess.
Right.
So where mindfulness really comes into play, the Says Who method that I created really addresses the cause of addiction. If you want to really talk about substances, and they can listen to my podcast on that, because it really goes into questioning the cause of the addiction, not just the behavior. We want to really get to the root of the cause. Why did we reach for those substances? What feels compulsive in us that makes us want to reach outside of ourselves to ameliorate the discomfort that we're feeling? Do you know?
I do.
Where mindfulness comes into play, just the twofold aspect of that. Mindfulness makes us aware, again, what we talked about prior, of the desires that we have, right, and how sometimes we feel out of control with the desires that we have. And there's much deeper things for us to understand that's below the surface of our desires, which might not be the very things that we're reaching out for.
Well, I watched listened to the podcast that you're talking about, the interview with this gentleman who was sharing his own personal experience with alcohol, and I think it was alcohol, but there was a deeper conversation that you had, which was something that had happened to you in your childhood that sort of was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think this happens for women, is you hear something or something happens in your family or in your community that you think is going to happen to you, and you put in this protective behavior thinking that you've got to react to it in a certain way, and that behavior becomes addictive.
Right, exactly. Or compulsive
behavior,
or obsessive, it depends on the way in which it's manifested. For me, that was really the genesis of my book, Says Who. When I was not quite 15 years old, my oldest sister, Esther, who I just idolized. She was an incredible woman, and she unfortunately succumbed to mental illness, and she had a breakdown when she was not quite 20 years old, and she was never the same again.
Right.
And it was devastating, and it was truly tragic, and it was very traumatic for me. When I was 4, and I went into deep fight or flight. And when we go into fight or flight, we tell ourselves things because we're in a deep fear state.
Yes. Yeah.
So I told myself at the time that what happened to her was going to happen to me. And I held on to that belief unbeknownst to myself, because we sometimes bury thoughts in our subconscious. And then what happens, what I talk about in Says Who, is that we can feel the side effects or the symptoms of a thought gone unattended to. Do you know?
Right.
That's why it's so important for us to really connect to what's upsetting us and to take a deep dive in the inner journey. So yes, we can tell ourselves, in my particular case, I told myself that I would also be afflicted with mental illness the way my sister was
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, for another person, it could be, oh, my father or my mother was an alcoholic. Well, I'm destined to be an alcoholic. Do you know, oh, my uncle was a gambler. It must be in the genetic code. It must be in the DNA.
Yeah.
I'll have more of a chance of becoming an addict than not. These are the things we tell ourselves, without going into, I'm a big believer in neuroscience. And I think that, this whole understanding now bringing forward how we can create new neural pathways in our brains, and that our brains are constantly changing and growing. We can change this. We must be very mindful of what we tell ourselves in the areas of, especially specifically what you asked me, Margaret, in the area of addiction. A lot of people take on, as I said before, beliefs about themselves, and it becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people in our community, for example, have talked about having an abusive childhood, and there may not have been a traumatic experience. It may not have been something that happened like with your sister, for example. It could have just been an aura in the family, just a feeling of being rejected. And don't forget, a lot of our women were in that community of women specifically were seen but not heard. Right. They didn't have a voice when you were younger. So even that, you then maybe eat or drink or even silly sexual behaviors and things that don't seem harmful, but when they become compulsive, they take on a dangerous
yes.
outcome.
And I talk about that in Live True, that I have a whole chapter on desire, right. And it's very important to know what that constant churning or that rumbling, sometimes we become insatiable. And the reason for that is that we're hungry for something that we're not really addressing what the craving really is about. Mm-hmm. The craving could be that we want attention, that we want to be heard and not just seen, that we want to be loved, that we want to be respected, that we want to be appreciated. And I say it's really, we want to connect. We're taking in all of these things, and then we have momentary satisfaction. And for a lot of people that are at the effect of their compulsivity or their addictions or obsessions, it satisfies you only for a short period of time. Yeah. And then, it's like that saying about Chinese food, then you're hungry an hour later.
Yeah.
It's like you then are constantly hungry. And what mindfulness helps us do is to have an awareness of what really is beneath the surface of your hunger. What is really beneath the surface of your desire? What is it that you desire? You might really just desire someone to hug you, to love you, to tell you that you matter and that you're good enough and that you're worthy, And it's not about stuffing all of this food or having sex. Some people are sex addicts, whatever the addiction, compulsivity is, that needs to be addressed.
So you're in a way talking, Aura, about mindfulness as almost a form of counseling. I mean, if you stop to think about it, a lot of people are depressed and using different substances to sort of numb that pain. And the real reason that you're saying they need to get to is deep, deep, deep. It's not something that you can just, bring out of it's because my mother did this when I was 3 years old. It's deeper than that. So can you explain how mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness meditation or mindfulness awareness, can help you feel safe going to that place?
I really have taken something like mindfulness, which again is a skill. It's a quality. It's like being kind or being compassionate.
Okay.
And I say this is a way. For me, it's like a beacon. It's a light that guides me. And when I become more aware of what isn't really making me feel good about myself, I can then bring myself to things that do make myself feel better. So it really is something that helps us on this life journey. It's a great tool. And the more you use it, the more you develop it, the more you can use it in all the areas of your life, which I've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
So it is very helpful, very useful in the areas of even things like addiction, as I said, and compulsivity, that you become so aware of when the desire starts to churn in you, and you start to feel this type of, dissatisfaction or frustration or ennui, and you can get to the bottom of it. You can say to yourself, I'm feeling like I need something. I'm feeling like I want something and I don't know what it is. Let me take a deeper dive into what's churning inside my heart
Yeah.
and my soul. I feel that the inner journey is such an important place to go into, and a lot of people are afraid to go in there because they're afraid of what they might find out. And what I want to say to that is, you might, what I say and live true, as I said, you need to go to the bottom. You need to take a deep dive into the bottom of your psyche, and you might find some wreckage there or a sunken ship. You're also going to find some great treasure.
You find gold coins down there somewhere.
Margaret,
No.
Treasures to find, but you have to be willing to go in there.
You know something, it's really interesting as you were talking. I love this when I interview people like you, because I always then start going to my own mind and thinking of examples to refer to. And I can actually say that 10 years ago, I went through a really big financial crisis, and like a lot of women did in 2008, it wasn't a surprise. But I remember that was when I started nibbling, eating food. And I just realized that really the last 3 or 4 years that whenever I had to even pay bills, which I'm totally cool with now, but based on that situation, years ago, I would always have a cake or something next to me, and I don't need the calories, right? So, and it was just when I finally, like you said, realized I'm eating food because I'm dealing with a money situation. I'm just paying my electricity bill, but I'm still, you know what I mean? But I'm still feeling like I need to just gobble down some food.
Yes, because it's, what it is it's a type of reward. And I'm not opposed to a reward. As a writer, I remember reading a wonderful article on what different authors reward themselves with.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
3 chapters. Let me go have chocolate chip cookies.
Salted caramels. Yeah, forever. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with us treating ourselves or rewarding ourselves. I don't have a problem with that. I think it's when it crosses over into the area where we don't feel like we can control it, and it's not enough. Do you know what I mean? Then suddenly the cookies are not enough, and we still feel unsatisfied. Pay attention to what you're feeling. I'm always amazed at those people that can take one piece of chocolate from a box and they're like, I'm good. I'm fine. I don't need another. You're like, wow, that's good control. Do you know? That's just enough for them. We have to know what our own personal enough is. What's enough for you might not be enough for me. And, that's a wonderful thing for us to know about ourselves. What is enough? I have a lot of meditations in Live True at the end of each chapter. And there's a wonderful meditation where I talk about being in the present moment and saying something like, this moment is enough. This is enough.
Yeah. So once you've had that moment of self-discovery, of dealing with of associating what is causing the addictive behavior or the compulsive behavior, what do you do then, though? I mean, what do you fill it with? Because all your life, many people all their lives have actually used that as a base for defining who they are.
Yes, for anybody that's really had a serious addiction, be it substances or cigarettes, and I've known people, and it's really hard. The first whatever length of time that is for people, it's personal. Where they are feeling like they're crawling out of their skin, basically. And I say, you got to ride that wave. Sometimes, I use the ocean as a metaphor a lot. Sometimes the ocean is tumultuous and it's very dangerous and it's very choppy. And then sometimes the sea is calm. And so you're going to experience a lot of the choppy difficulty when you first let go of the impulse to give in to temptation. It's really hard. And I think we've all, to varying degrees, have experienced it. You talked about the chocolate cake. You have to have that mindful awareness to be able to, I think breathing is the most incredible gift in that, for anybody who's had a child, has birthed children, not that you have to do this, there's something called Lamaze, where you're breathing through your contractions because it is really painful. And so you don't have to have a baby. You're birthing moments all the time. You're birthing through difficulty all the time. Use that like, just using our own breath is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want people just to think they have to be meditating to doing this. You know, you're in a moment, let's say, where you're really trying to diet, you're trying to give up an addiction. Feel the difficulty. Say, wow, this is hard. But where the positive support is, I say, and I talk about that in Says Who, that the reason why a lot of diets fail is because we don't give ourselves the thoughts that keep supporting us to reach our goals. So going back to addiction,
Mm-hmm.
you want to quit smoking. You wake up that morning, you're like, oh, I want a cigarette so badly right now, I can taste it. Be aware. Oh, okay. I'm aware that I really am hungering for this thing that I have really grown attached to and addicted to, if you will. This is really hard. Let me do a couple of deep breaths. Let me breathe through this difficulty. Let me be aware that I'm feeling difficulty in my body. Take a couple of deep breaths in and
Right.
let it go.
Or how can we help each other? I mean, if you have a friend who is dealing with something like this, dealing with an addictive personality, or because you know them and you know that they respond in certain ways to stress and whatever, how can we help each other?
You know how I think really how we can help each other. First of all, is we can listen to one another first and foremost. We can really hear each other. You know, that's very important to be able to hear what someone wants to share, even if it's uncomfortable for them or difficult, and for us to acknowledge that, by the way. I know this must be hard for you, you know, with compassion, with mindfulness, to be able to hold the space, to be a container. We are holding the space. It's sacred space, if you will. You know, this is why people go to confession. This is why people go to therapists. Not everybody can afford therapy, and not everybody, you know, looks to religion so that they can really release what they're holding inside themselves that's causing them tremendous suffering. Yeah. Be a container. Be a good listener, and offer up ways that can be nurturing. You know, offer to cook someone a meal. Say, come on, let's go take a walk together. I want to take you to the beach. Let's go walk in the park. Do you know, if you want to gift somebody, you know, say, I want to gift you at the spa. I want to gift you a massage. You know, there's so many ways in which we can really give each other these beautiful gifts that help one another when we're going through a difficult time.
Yeah. No, I really think that's the way to do it. And I think communities like 60andMe, for example, are really valuable in the virtual world because we don't have that proximity, and social isolation and loneliness are such big problems with not just women, but men as well. Of, you know, once you've left the workplace and your family's left home, you know, it's a big deal.
And what I want to add to that, Margaret, is that be aware that not everybody's comfortable asking for help.
Yes, it's a good point.
What I said earlier about this woman who shared with me that she has a very hard time receiving. And sometimes we really have to be the initiators. We can't wait for somebody who's suffering so visibly that that's when we see the we want to be able to offer up our love and support without seeing somebody in crisis. Right. You know, we have a tendency, it's wonderful that you have this community, because we have a tendency to get so involved and so enmeshed in our own lives that we don't even avail ourselves to others in a way that really could help them. And the thing that I find really sad and rather tragic is that suicide, you know, sometimes people will, you know, many times, if you will, people are not even aware about how much someone is suffering.
That they often say that, don't they? That we had no idea that person was going through that or whatever. You know, we've got an opportunity. I think people like you and the community that I look after is that, you know, to really break through the social media boundaries, because that is continually narrowing the amount of conversation that we have with each other, and the opportunity to actually listen when you say to someone, "How are you?" Like, not just say fine, because you know no one really is going to listen anyway. That they're there to hear you.
Yes, and I want to also bring back mindfulness, because it's a very valuable tool. And what mindfulness does is it makes us more aware. And we're more aware. We're not only aware of what we're feeling and experiencing, but we're more aware of others. and that's really the beauty of mindfulness, is that it starts to make, it's like a camera, the lens, it starts to really focus in more, not just on ourselves
Right.
and what our needs are, but we become more intuitive of others, and we're more sensitive to others and more compassionate.
Can people teach themselves mindfulness meditation, or do you think it's something that has to be explained? I mean, we're using those words fairly openly, and mindfulness does this and this, but how does somebody who's watching this video say, okay, I'd like to do that, I'd like to practice that mindfulness meditation, what do I do?
That's a really good question. I would start with a mindfulness exercise practice. Not everybody wants to meditate, although I think it's an incredible practice. It's very beneficial. I say mindfulness can start any place at any time. Right. And do something like, for example, eating. We rush through most of the things that we do, unfortunately. I have a blog that I wrote for Huffington Post years ago called Your Morning Cup of Tea or Coffee Can Be Your Meditation. And here's something that we do on a regular basis. I mean, not that everybody drinks coffee or tea, but most people do. And, sit somewhere quietly with that, hold your cup of tea or your coffee in your hand, take some time. This is one of my favorites, by the way. Yeah. Take some time in your day. I say all it takes is just 10 minutes. Find a quiet place to sit, make yourself a cup of tea, and find a lovely place to sit down. You can do it with yourself. You could have a friend do it with you, and hold that cup of tea in your hand and feel the warmth of it as you're holding it, and then take that cup. And when you put that to your lips, you feel the warmth of it on your mouth. Mm-hmm. And when you take your very first sip, you taste it. You really taste it, which this is mindfulness. This is being in the present with the very thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to drink more of it, you feel it going down your throat and you taste it. So I want people to do one thing a day. Just try with one thing, whether it's eating, if you're someone who likes to walk, if you're someone who likes to maybe take walks, don't be on your phone. Maybe you like to have earbuds and listen to music. What's really beautiful about walking, I feel, is like I like to listen to nature. I like to listen to the chirping of birds. I like to see the bushes moving. I like to see the change of seasons of the leaves. So find one thing in your day that you do and really be present with it. It's called present moment awareness. And I also have something, Margaret, in Live True called life gazing. The moments of really, I'm talking to you, but I'm surrounded by windows. I can look out my window. I'm not going to really focus on that right now because I want to focus on the conversation that we're having. Right. But what if someone just looks out the window? It could be raining, watching hearing the pitter patter of the rain outside your window, watching the way, I love with rain where the beads of water, they just slowly start to go down the window. Yeah, I like that too. So many things we can do. Don't rush when you're taking your shower or your bath. Some days I know you're going to be in a hurry. Pick something, one thing. And so when you say to me, what can people do? How can they begin? I say, pick one thing and start today. For those that are listening, be your next meal that you're going to have, slow it down. And what's beautiful about mindfulness is it heightens our senses. So suddenly you're eating and you're like, oh, I'm really tasting this food. This is delicious. I'm really, we don't take things for granted. We take so much for granted. So many precious moments. I think that's why a lot of people, women particularly, like knitting. I think knitting is one of those meditative things where you basically you have to pay it. And I always think about every time I'm knitting something for someone, putting my love into it, like weaving my love into the stitches. And it's just like surrounding it with space. Knitting, by the way, is a beautiful example of it's very meditative, as you said, and it's very mindful. Yeah. You are so present when you doing that. I've always loved knitting. I tried doing it and I didn't continue doing it for that very reason, that there's something so meditative about the movement of it, So the things like that, whether you're a knitter, whether you like to cook, if you are someone who likes to garden, gardening is so meditative.
Or painting or any kind of creative. Yeah.
Painting, writing, gardening. When people say things like, oh, I don't have anything to do. If you're somebody who doesn't do any of those things that I just mentioned, sit quietly, make yourself a cup of tea. Is that difficult to do?
No, honestly, I'm glad that we finished on that note, because it's really a very practical thing. Mindfulness can, and then linking it back to the addictive personality, in doing those things, you actually start to realize who you are, who your essential self is, what all your little buttons are that you push for yourself very conveniently, that then create the desire to eat or to, smoke or whatever. So I love that.
Having a mindful awareness of what is churning in us gives us an awareness of who we are.
I love it. Well, I would encourage you to go out and check out Aura's website, auranadrich.com, and she's got a wealth of information there. The books are Live True, A Mindfulness Guide to Authenticity, and also Says Who. These are really good practical guides to discovering what's going on inside. So thank you so much, Aura. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Our Patreon supporters help us to make a bigger difference in the lives of women over 60 all around the world. They get exclusive videos, live video shows, discounts, and much more. So please look for the link on this page. It is somewhere down here, up there. And join our tribe of women in our 60andMe community who are actually making a big difference in the world, challenging aging stereotypes. So thank you so much for your support.